When Jude sees Cardan up on this throne in the midst of this exaggerated, beautiful scene that Locke had curated, she thinks that he looks almost more myth-like, but then, dismisses it because it's Cardan. But she thinks of something that the counselor had told her, which is, a king is a living symbol, a beating heart, a star upon which Elfin's future is written. Surely you have noticed that since his reign began, the isles are different. Storms come in faster, colors are a bit more vivid, smells are sharper. When he becomes drunk, his subjects become tipsy without knowing why. When his blood falls, things grow. Now, she probably thought they were just exaggerating. It was all symbolism, but they're being earnest, that everything that they're saying is reality. And I think part of Jude is still mortal, that despite growing up in this magical world, seeing and experiencing magic, a part of her doesn't believe in Cardan being this myth and this myth being real. I love that Jude realizes Cardan stole the ring off her finger, because one, it is Cardan showing, look, I'm learning to be sneaky like you. Look what I can do. Be proud of me. But also, it could also kind of symbolize that he has already secretly stolen her heart, because that is the very ring that he uses to propose to her later. And you could argue that he already has stolen her heart. She just hasn't realized or accepted it yet. Oh, Jude, darling. So she, notices that he stole the ring off her finger, and she thinks, I wonder if Narcy would count that as a betrayal. It sure feels like one. She feels betrayed that he stole the ring off her finger. Meanwhile, he's like, look what I did. He's like a cat bringing in a bird, and you're, admonishing him for bringing in a dead bird. But he's like, but I caught this for you. When Cardan says, I don't worry my pretty head about that kind of thing. You're the ones who are supposed to be doing the work. There's two parts to this. One is that he's saying to Jude, my role in this con that we're doing is to be the entertainment, the thing that distracts the crowd while you're doing all your scheming and underlying coup in the background. That's my role, and it's so much easier for me to do that and to not have to lie if I don't know what's actually going on. That's why I don't want to know what's actually going on. But the second part of this is that he's terrified too, because if he actually gets involved, then he actually has to acknowledge and participate in this role of power that's been thrusted upon him that he wants nothing to do. He doesn't like his family, despite yearning for their love. They have never given it. He would not want to be a part of this family. He doesn't want to be born there because it's been toxic. He's just watched how power has been toxic, and he would ideally love to be as far away from it as he told Jude. When he said, if you're gonna make a deal with Balkan, can you at least ask him to send me as far away? I won't bother him. I lied. There's actually two more parts to Cardan saying, I don't wear my pretty head. The third part is that he's trying to be not threatening to Jude. He's trying to be look, I'm just playing this role. I don't actually want to have power, because he doesn't want her to feel threatened by him, that he actually wants to keep the power and not relinquish it to Oak. He wants them to be on the same side, not on opposite sides. But the fourth part is that he still has not accepted agency in his life. He is still letting fate dictate it, because, he's been told time and time again when he was growing up about this supposed prophecy that's going to destroy, that he's, a source of ruin, and that he's been pushed around his entire life by so many people, used by so many people. So he just, instead of fighting against the current, he's just letting it push him. It's not until Jude is taken by the Undersea that he finally wrangles agency back into his life, that he is going to dictate and decide how it's going to go. So Cardan slides a hand on Jude's hip as though he might pull me closer, and I think he would love to pull her closer because he is so afraid for her that he wants to pull her close and protect her. He doesn't know what Locke is up to, but he can sense that it's going to be something that could be detrimental to Jude, that could harm Jude. And he wants to protect her as best as he can, but his hands are tied. He can only do so much, and we saw it similarly in the first book, that when she was being bullied, he would try to do something to distract them, such as ripping the wings off a random fairy boy, drawing the attention away from Jude so she wasn't being bullied by Valerian anymore. And he knows that he can only do so much because he is going to be in the center of attention at this revel. But this spark going on between them, I think, distracts him, because Lily Jude says it makes her dizzy. So I think he would have done a more elegant job of sending her away than he actually did. I think he got, dizzy in the heat of the moment and just told her, go back to the palace. But that was the worst thing to tell Jude, because she becomes oppositional and goes, no, and asserts her dominance by staying. And yeah, When Jude says, something is really wrong with me, to want what I hate, to want someone who despises me, even if he wants me too. Now, on one level, her love is contorted thanks to growing up with her father's murderer and growing to love him and him loving her. She was never going to have a healthy, loving relationship with anyone. It was always going to be a little messed up, but it works for the two of them. But the other thing is that she has grown up told that she cannot have what she wants, that this is, she's lucky to have what she is as a mortal. She can't have anything higher because that's unachievable, and so she's always yearned for something that is unachievable. Cardan is unachievable. He is the king of fairy. He is not going to marry a mortal girl, so why yearn for it? But a part of her is always going to yearn for the grass on the other side. I feel like Locke is digging at Cardan when he suggests them playing the game The Queen of Mirth, which is typically where they steal a human girl, get her drunk on fairy wine, and then mess with her. Because I feel like, as someone that likes secrets, and as someone that was close to Cardan, he probably knows that Cardan used to steal Balkan's human servants and send them back, not liking that they used to be enchanted and tortured, basically. And so it's him kind of being like, hey, you're gonna participate in this. Let's see how far I can push you into doing things. Like, are you gonna dance for anyone's tune? But on top of that, to make it even worse, he chooses Jude because he senses that there could be potential feelings that Cardan has towards Jude. Locke was also really banking on Jude being there because I think Locke, just like with Taryn, is very good at observing people, and sometimes he makes wrong assumptions just like how Jude does. But he was 95% sure that Jude was gonna be there, not like Cardan be his worst self about her there to curb him in, but I think he's also a little bitter that Jude's not playing along anymore, and that's why he was really hoping that she would be there so that he can torment her, use her for his story and his entertainment. And that's why he also doesn't drug her. He wants her to be fully aware of this embarrassment that he is putting on her, to then kind of be like, you think you have the upper hand and you can command me, but I'm a fairy and I am high up in the fairy court and I will be able to be above you at all times. Dude, darling, I loved yet again, well, I love to hate this, that she assumes wrong. She assumes the worst thing with Cardan because when, Locke makes this announcement, she looks over at Cardan, finds something dangerous glittering in his eyes. I will get no sympathy there. No, he is pissed at Locke. And he's pissed that you didn't take his advice and go home. He was trying to protect you. And the truly heartbreaking thing is, she's annoyed at Locke, but she turns her, pure fury onto Cardan. Like, it's his fault that they're in this situation and that he can't stop it and she can't stop it about revealing the whole scheme that they're up to. And so she blames him. It's not his fault. He tried. Locke knows that they can't lie, so he asks Cardan loudly, tell us what you think of Our Lady. Except he doesn't actually fully appreciate Cardan's wordsmithery, his use of words, because he figures out how to say, I have too often been troubled by dreams of Jude. Her face features prominently in my most frequent nightmares. And you can interpret it negatively or positively. And I'm interpreting positively. There's a moment earlier in the chapter where, Cardan has his hand on her hip and she thinks, he doesn't try to kiss me, of course. He hasn't been shot at, isn't delirious or drink, isn't filled with enough self-loathing. He has to be at this worst, hating, negative part of himself to, give in and kiss her, to have these emotions. And the same thing's happening now. She is absolutely mortified and embarrassed, and Cardan is drinking her in, and she, sees to him, I hate you. And he tilts her chin up and says, say it again, thinking that the only time that she actually, kissed him was when she said, I hate you. It's interesting because I don't think Jude is aware of it herself, but as she's spiraling, literally dancing around for the others' amusement, it feels like she's out of control, kind of like how she felt before Dane put that geese on her. She yells at them to stop, that she wants to dance with the king to do a reel. And she may not be consciously aware that Cardan grounds her when she's spiraling, just like he did at the end of the first book when she was spiraling after her fight with, Maddox. He's the one that grounds her when he says, have I told you how hideous you look tonight? I cannot. Oh my god, I love this annotation from Holly Black because, she's like, I would like to dance with the king. And Cardan smile is unreadable. I'd be delighted, he said. And her annotation says, he can't lie, but she doesn't notice. He genuinely is delighted to dance with her, but she is so wrapped up in her own emotions that she doesn't notice. So Jude orders the knights to surround and protect Cardan because she sees like the undersea is coming, and she says Cardan looks at their movement in confusion, and then with a brief bright spark of panic, no doubt he is recalling how Maddox ordered the circling of the guards around the dais at Prince Dane's coronation ceremony just before Balkan started murdering people, and is showing that even though he really does trust Jude, there is a slight seedling of doubt, of wondering if just maybe she is like her father and will break his trust yet again and do the exact same thing that Maddox did and get rid of him in that exact same manner. But I think it makes Cardan's character even more interesting because both of them, Cardan and Jude, have reasons to distrust people, but yet Cardan automatically trusts others. He's willing to put his trust in others even though they continuously ruin that trust. So a couple things about this marriage proposal done by the Undersea. One is doing it in front of a crowd, so it's putting Cardan on the spot. But two, it is commanding him, pretty much threatening, as Cardan points out. And that it was never going to work in their favor because Cardan has grown up under this weight of being commanded, being told what to do by everyone. And also he's a teenager, and any teenager that you command to do something, they automatically become oppositional. They will dig their own grave just to oppose you. And so that was never going to work in their favor. But it's also showing already how Orla would be viewing this relationship, that she could command him to do things, that he does not have his own agency, even though he is the High King of Elfheim and has a lot of power. She still sees him as a child. But it also makes me wonder if Narcia at least attempted to persuade him into a marriage, because originally, prior to all this happening, there was a loose understanding that Narcia and Cardan were supposed to get married. So it's interesting the way that this is turned, and it doesn't have anything to do with Jude, though his crush on Jude does slightly affect the outcome. So in a previous video, I talked about how one of the biggest hurdles that Cardan has to get through is accepting the agency back into his life, not letting fate continuously push him around. And we're seeing because for most of his life, he has let things push him around, just going with the flow, and that's why he's being lazy, because if he makes a decision, he's learned that it kind of backfires and doesn't work in his favor, and it's just easier just to go with whatever other people tell him to do. But right now, in this moment, we're seeing him wrangle agency back into his life, because G describes his voice rings with authority. He no longer just looks like the High King of Elfheim, he sounds like the High King of Elfheim. But he also then snaps at Jude and orders her to assemble the council. So it's him finally making true decisions in his life to dictate what it's going to look like, and it's not going to be marrying Narcia, and it's not going to let Ola and the rest of the Undersea dictate what he's going to do and command him. It's interesting that the note Maddox left in Jude's room is addressed from the Grand General of the High King's army to His Majesty's Seneschal. It doesn't say from Maddox to Jude, which it could have if he was addressing it as a fatherly figure, but no, he is addressing them by their titles. I think to kind of show her, look, if you wanted to be on the board, you wanted to be a player, fine, we're going to be players. And this is right before I think he offers her to kind of align themselves. Maddox bringing up about the moment with the Queen of Mirth asking, why is she humiliating herself in this way in front of the court? What does this prince have that he's offering her? It reminded me of a moment in the first book, which is when she was forced to eat the fairy fruit and she starts undressing herself, so she's half naked, like how she was with Queen of Mirth, being laughed at by others. Only that time she actually couldn't comprehend because she was under the intoxicants of the fairy fruit. Here she fully knew they were making fun of her. But both times, I feel like she plays slightly the long game. She doesn't react right there in the moment like Maddox does. She waits, and she gets them back eventually. When Maddox says, "Yet so long as Cardan wears the blood crown, I am sworn to him as surely as I was to his father, as surely as I would have been to Dane or even Balkan." And that should be a red flag for Jude, because he was sworn to Eldred, but yet he went against Eldred's wishes when he wanted Dane on the throne, and ended up unaliving almost an entire family line. So what's going to stop him this time? He went against the last High King, so who's to say he wouldn't find a loophole to go against this High King? It's interesting that throughout the first book, both Jude and Taryn were being tested for their trustworthiness because they can lie. So Dane tested Jude and Locke was testing Taryn. But yet Maddox right here is saying, but you, who are not bound by your words, whose promises can be forsworn, because any fairy physically cannot break a vow, but Jude can, and he's asking her to do it. But like, for Jude, if she did that, then she would be ostracized in this world. She could not exist in this world because no one would trust her word. She has to go above and beyond to prove herself, like, her word trustworthy, her vows is trustworthy, because she can easily break them. So she wouldn't be able to exist here. Like, yeah, maybe she can live in Maddox's house, but she couldn't be her own person living in this world, which is what she wants. And Maddox knows this and is willing to sacrifice her to get what he wants. Okay, so previously when I just said that, like, Maddox is willing to sacrifice Jude for his own benefit, at least it looks like Jude is very aware of this. Maybe not in, like, what he offered, but in other moments when Maddox brings up again the humiliation of the Queen of Mirth thing, she says, "You let me be humiliated in Fairy from the time I was a child. You've let Fairy hurt me and laugh at me and mutilate me. I've been glamored and carried into a revel, weeping and alone. As far as I can tell, the only difference between tonight and all the other nights when I endured indignities without complaint is that those benefited you. And when I endured this, it benefits me." Then Maddox responds with, "I didn't know," and she says, "You didn't want to know." Now, one, is showing that he turned a blind eye to this, even though it's interesting because you would think that it would offend him, because Jude is technically an extension of him. That he was offended earlier when in the last book, when he found out that the other kids in his school humiliated and bullied Jude, and she refused to give names because an extension of him, they hurt his pride. But yet, he turned a blind eye in all these other moments, but it's very fitting because it's very fairy-like. In classic folk tales, the folk that take, like, say, a changeling child do a very poor job of keeping that child alive because they're very pet owners. They forget that humans can't withstand the cold, that they can't dance for hours, that they need to be fed. And I love that being kind of emphasized here. So even though in the previous chapter or a couple chapters ago, Cardan had sounded like the High King of Elfhame finally, and he had called for this council meeting, he throws himself on the couch, disdaining the table entirely. And in part, it could be him trying to, show Jude, look, I'm not afraid, I'm not trying to take power. But also, he may not feel like he deserves to have a seat at the table just yet. While Jude may have outmaneuvered Maddox previously, Oak still exists, so there's still a potential for him to seize power. And the problem is that Jude allowed him to retain the power he previously had, which is a decent amount. And instead of having him channel the bloodlust that he is craving into something useful for the kingdom, she is letting him simmer on the back burner, and it's only getting worse for him. And that is why he tries to offer an alliance between him and Jude. But when she continues to allow him to simmer, when they ignore him saying that we should go to war with the Undersea, I think this is when he starts looking to other courts to see where he can sate his bloodlust. Since I've reread the series numerous times, I feel like I'm pretty good at understanding Cardan and, sensing the subtle changes in his, mood. But I feel like even if you haven't reread it, numerous times, and you've only read the first book and up to this one, you should probably start to sense him being prickly when, he says, "Now I am not to marry at Orla's command, only breed." And the thing in this situation is that the council, just like with Ola, are kind of talking down to him. They're commanding him to do things. And Cardan is, once again, a teenager, so teenagers are oppositional. They would rather dig their own grave just to oppose you. But also, again, it's his life, it's his future that they're trying to decide in this moment. Instead of offering advice, they're telling him what he should do. Cardan reacting as surprised and clearly unhappy when Jude announces to the rest of the council about, Orla and Balgon's communication is not surprising. It's not surprising because it is his brother and the mother of his ex-girlfriend, who are both pretty powerful players on the board, most likely scheming to unalive him. So I could see him being like, "Yo, dude, I want to know about this at least." However, it is surprising because previously he doesn't really seem to want to know any information that's going on politically. Literally in a previous chapter when Jude asked him about the rebel, he said, "You should have kept Lockyer for the details." It's, easier for him to play his role if he knows less information, less things for him to lie about. And, in part, it's Jude also, though, not wanting to let him to know enough information because it's easier for her to maintain power and for him to not take it away or keep power if he doesn't know what's going on in the background. And he did say, "You rule for me," previously, so he has said that. But the thing is that Cardan is starting to realize that, if he's finally going to step away from letting fate push him around to finally take agency in his own life to dictate what it's going to look like, then he needs to start knowing what's going on and what's happening and all the information, and Jude needs to start communicating with him about that. Carden right now, him leaning forward, no longer sleepy or bored, but every bit the terrifying fairy lord, empty-eyed and incalculably powerful. One, is hot, but two, it's him proving that I'm done with being pushed around by everyone in fate. I'm taking command, and no one can command me, not even Jude anymore. Wait a minute, so Jude's describing this prisoner to the bomb, which we later learn it's Carden's mother. She describes her as having horns, little ones. Goatish, I guess? Kind of like Jude's ram horns that she is known for wearing. And that might partially explain why Carden is initially attracted to her. And then, other reasons, but part of it. Jude claiming Dane's desk, at least in this moment, while she waits for the prisoner, is interesting because in comparison to the previous chapter, it's almost, I don't know if it's like mirroring or like a foiling of her and Carden. Because Carden called the council meeting. He walked in the room and yet he sprawls on the couch. He doesn't go to the table because even though he has the power, he doesn't think he's deserves it. So that's why he doesn't sit at the table, along with other reasons. But Jude, meanwhile, doesn't really have power, but she claims things to at least outwardly look like she has the power in the situation, even if internally she knows she doesn't deserve it. And it's just interesting how the two of them present these things. And yet again, Jude is thinking about Carden's mouth, because as she's looking at his mother, she says that they shared those ridiculous cheekbones, that soft mouth. Those are the only two features that she talks about. And it brings back that something that she said in the first book, which is that once you kiss someone, the potential of kissing again hovers over you. She is constantly thinking about it. The amount of time she's talked about Carden's mouth in this book so far, and I'm not even at the halfway point, she definitely wants to kiss him again. It's interesting that the Court of Shadows has dubbed Jude the queen, their shadow queen, which it could go with like the fact that they're the Court of Shadows, but it's kind of the truth too, because she is a queen in all but name. She is still standing in the shadows, still kind of there, still kind of dictating, still her presence is felt. She just hasn't been brought to the light yet. While Jude may be, said by Carden's mother to resemble her own mother strongly, I think Vivi matches her personality more. She's talking about how Eva used to, love fairyland, but she missed her old life. She would, sneak back to the mortals and bring back little things that she missed. Just like Vivi. Vivi misses the mortal world. She sneaks back often. That's the only reason why I think Taryn and Jude actually go back to the mortal world, is because Vivi brings them along. She has a room full of like little random trinkets and trash, according to Jude, but it's little things that she misses from the mortal world. Whereas Jude and Taryn don't really miss that part of their lives. The only thing that they do bring back are for the necessities, like tampons or clothes to be able to use as costumes when they do venture into the mortal world. Now, we don't know if we can trust Lady Asha. We don't know if she's just sharing rumors or making up lies, but if we are to believe her version of the story about Jude's mortal parents unaliving a woman and burning the body to hide her mother's disappearance from Maddox, then it's showing their level of desperation, but also their willingness to go that far to get what they want, which is something we see Jude do sometimes. And it could prove that it's a trait that she might have inherited, might have been part of her nature, but then it was nurtured to be even worse thanks to Maddox. It might be the reason why it hasn't truly affected her that much that she unalived Valerian, because she was pushed to be that desperate, just like her parents, or even when she unalives Balkan later. It's interesting that Jude's mother was also told a prophecy that her child was destined to be a greater weapon than Justin could ever forge. Now, she assumed it was Vivi, but most likely it was Jude. And it's interesting because Carden was also told a prophecy when he was a child. But yet the difference is that Carden always knew about it. He grew up under the shadow of this prophecy, and growing up under the shadow, it kind of stunted his growth. He always felt it. Whereas Jude knew nothing about this prophecy till this moment. But yet, they both fulfill these prophecies. Nothing that they could have done, knowing or not knowing, was going to stop these fates from coming into fruition. Oh my god, I just realized something. And I think in part because every other time I've read this, I've read pretty much what has been on the surface level. I haven't been digging as deep as I have been recently. And as Jude's describing the outfits that Taryn had made and sent for her, I'm starting to realize, oh my god, I think Taryn's been involved so much longer than I originally had thought. A little bit later in the book, we see that Taryn pretends to be Jude to trick Carden to release Maddox from his vow. I had thought this whole time that maybe Maddox had asked her to do that maybe a couple days prior, or even that day of. But with this, now I'm starting to think, oh no, Taryn's been scheming alongside him for so much longer. She probably offered Jude these clothes, so then one, Jude does need clothes, but two, she will be wearing a very particular style for at least a week or two or a couple leading up to when Taryn, fulfills the rest of the scheme. But also it gives Taryn a chance to recreate a similar outfit at the same time, so when she pretends to be Jude, it will look identical. And it kills me, but at the same time, I totally understand why Taryn's doing it, because Maddox does love Taryn, but he loves Jude more, and she's trying to prove herself to Maddox. So Jude describes how Tatterfell, combs her hair and puts a, new comb carved in the shape of a toad. And I'm like, I would probably have ignored it if Holly Black didn't put the annotation toad. And I'm like, you know what, let me just look at the symbolism of toads. Typically, they represent a demonic creature. They represent magical and evil, which some people might view Jude being like that. But also because of the transformation from tadpole to maturity, it can represent resurrection or rebirth, which we are watching Jude kind of in the midst of changing. She's not a butterfly, which Tatterfell pointed out early in the book, that you're just a worm pretending to be a butterfly. Like, she's not going to transform like a butterfly, but she might transform like how a tadpole into a toad does. Jude and Maddox arguing during this council meeting where Maddox says that he plans on using Oak as bait to catch Orla is interesting because, one, Jude does actually follow through and use Oak in her own strategies. In the next book, we see her actually bring him back to Fairy when there's a war brewing and a potential marriage alliance. She's trying to give him a little bit more autonomy, but she does have final say, and she is still kind of using him in a similar way that Maddox is, and she does go along with Maddox's plan in this book too. But the thing is, it's too late. She's trying to keep him safe, putting him in the mortal world and doing all these other things, but he was safest prior to Jude or Maddox using him in their coups. At the moment that Jude involved Oak in her coup of claiming him as a potential heir, she put her target on his back. And we learned that especially in Oak's story, The Stolen Heir, when he says that he's had numerous assassination attempts on his life throughout the years because of people claiming that they would rather have Oak on the throne instead of Carden. And so Jude is trying to protect him, but it's already too late. She already acted and didn't think that far in the future. It's interesting that when Jude does approach Carter, she says, "You sent for me." He says, yes. So are we at war? For a moment, I think he is talking about us. And I think the thing with Carden is that we see he does have a lot of double meaning in his words. And I think he is kind of talking about both. Like, did you and Maddox decide we're actually at war with the Undersea? But also, are we fighting? Because of how the two of them ended the last interaction in the last council meeting, him being annoyed that she didn't tell him about Balkan and the Undersea talking, and also her being annoyed with everything he was doing and ordering her around. Damn, Carden being philosophical, and I just realized how deep he's kind of being, or it might be implying. I might be just assuming he's deeper than he is. But when Locke says, "You can't fight the sea," and Carden gives a little laugh, "You can fight anything. Winning, though, that's something else again." Isn't that right, Jude? And I think he's kind of being like, we both know that. We both know we can fight each other, ourselves, the entire world. But winning against that's a different matter. When Jude says, "I think about Randallin's advice, his reminder that I have power. Maybe I do, but I am still unable to get rid of a master of rebels for half an hour, no less a grand general who's also more or less my father." And in part, it's, one thing to claim you have power, but you kind of have to show you do, especially in this world. But the other thing is that these two people, Locke and Maddox, used to have power over her, and now she just hop, skate, jumped over them. So obviously they're going to question this, and they're not going to be used to her standing above them, commanding them. I love this sudden change in Carden, this sudden tonal change. It's not sudden, it's been building. It definitely has been building, but I think his breaking point was all in one night when Locke used Jude as a queen of mirth, and then the Undersea commanding him to do what, tell him what to do. He's realizing the way that he's been acting, the way he's been living his life, the easygoing, go with the flow, be other people's puppets, doesn't make him happy and doesn't keep the people he loves safe. In order to keep the people he loves safe, he needs to be a more active participant in his life. He needs to claim the power that he actually has and truly use it. And so, he's actually commanding Locke to leave, commanding Jude to come. He's trying to be more informed, taking, messages from his brother. He's going to stumble along the way because he's never actually had to be an active participant in his own life. but he's being an active participant in his own life now. Actually, it's kind of interesting for a couple different reasons. Cardan's anger towards Jude suggesting that he seduces Narcia. Now, for one, he's angry because he's like, I'm in love with you. Why do you think I denied her? I want you to know I don't want her. I want you. But also, it kind of goes back to him rooming in that room that he had prior to moving to the king's quarters, which was previously a courtier's quarters. A room for someone, to circle in and out of, to not be there for long, to be the lovers. She is treating him like a lover, that the only thing that he could offer to be used in her schemes is his sexual prowess, whereas not his intelligence, because he is smart, he is cunning, he is very good with his words. And he's a little offended that she's not seeing that side of him, just as Jude is offended when Maddox and Belkin just assumes that she is doing what she does because she's in love with Cardan. So one of the reasons why I love this scene, which there are numerous, it lives rent-free in my mind, is him saying, very well, Jude, tell me how it's done. Do you think it's like, she'll like it if I came to her like this? It's him saying, like, pretty much, I don't want to be your puppet anymore. I'm trying to step away from this role and you're pulling me back in it. Just like how Maddox is still treating Jude like a child, even though Jude's like, I'm an adult. I'm an equal on the board. Aren't we equals? Which is exactly what Cardan is trying to do. He's trying to be like, I want us to be partners, not you commanding me. But him saying, do you think she'll like it if I came to her like this? Tell me what to do. Fine, I am your puppet. But also no, I am going to be doing exactly these moves on Nicaea, and I hope you are jealous because I actually want you. Balkan might have said that there is a fine line between fear and love that mortals often confuse, but there's also a fine line between anger and love, and I think Cardan recognizes that because Jude describes that his expression mirrors my own, surprise and a little horror. And in that moment, he says, tell me again what you said at the revel. She says, what? He says, that you hate me. Tell me that you hate me. And I think he recognizes that with her expression between the two of them, that it was going to probably stall there. But with using her anger towards him, he continues the momentum of this heated moment, also giving her an excuse, saying that this doesn't have to mean anything if you're too scared of it. You can continue to hate me, but we can also continue this moment. When Jude says, I hate you so much that sometimes I can't think of anything else, at that he makes a harsh, low sound. And I think he recognizes that he would rather be hated by Jude than not thought of at all. That she at least feels some form of emotion to be thinking about him constantly, which is exactly what is happening in his own mind. That he loves and hates Jude simultaneously and cannot get her out of his own mind. He literally admits it during the Queen of Mirth thing of how often she haunts his dreams. When Cardan says, I want to tell you so many lies, for one, he physically cannot, he is a fae. But also I think he's referencing what he said in The Cruel Prince when they first kissed, when he said, most of all, I hate you because I think of you often. It's disgusting and I can't stop. He said something like that and she kissed him. So he says things like that. He says other things just like that. Literally right before this, he says, tell me what you said at the revel. That she hates him. Because he thinks that I'll keep saying things like that if it means that you keep kissing me. And the chapter ends with Jude saying, I hate that he knows what he's doing and I don't. It's once again her proving like, not only are we existing in his world, but yet he knows something that I don't. Because every time that she knows something that he doesn't or is better than him at it, it gives her like a slight upper hand. She feels like she has a little bit more power over him. Then she says, I hate being vulnerable. I hate that I throw my head back, barring my throat, literally leaving herself vulnerable for him to unalive her. But it's proving that instinctively she does trust him enough to be this vulnerable. And though at the same time, she still sees this kind of vulnerability as being a weakness, as being negative, not realizing the strength in this just yet. And it ends with her then saying a single last thing in my head, that I like him better than I've ever liked anyone. And that of all the things he's ever done to me, making me like him so much is by far the worst. She likes him more than she likes her sisters. And it makes her, she thinks it's a weak thing. It makes her weak. It makes her, clouds her judgment, because it was so much easier to hate him, to see him as her enemy. To see all of fairy as kind of her enemy, even though she wants to exist in this world. By falling in love with him, she is kind of simultaneously falling in love with fairy because he represents fairy in Alfheim.
So for a while now, I have been rereading the Cruel Prince series while doing an in-depth literary analysis of it. I am currently working through the second book, which is The Wicked King. But the point of this video is actually that I came across another book talker's video talking about how they just read The Cruel Prince, and they're asking us our opinion as to why we think Jude kissed Cardan. And I think there's two reasons to it, in my personal opinion. One is that she definitely wanted to do that. She says from the very beginning of the first book that she finds Cardan attractive, that if he wasn't so cruel, she probably would be in love with him like a lot of the other girls. And also, she just saw him making out with two girls at Locke's party, so she's probably like, is he really that good? Or are you just like attracted to him because of his power? And in addition to that, it's a power play because she's the one that initiates it, so she kind of has the power in the situation. But the other reason is that she has been told her entire life to be content with what she had, that she's lucky to exist in the world of fairy, especially right now saying don't reach too high. She's saying that in regards to Dane, like don't reach, try to be a mistress to Prince Dane. That's what she thinks is happening, and she's wrong. But I think it's Jude kind of thumbing her nose at Arenia in this situation, being like, everyone told me not to reach too high. What's reaching too high? Me making out with the Prince of Elfhame. So screw all of you. So I think it's a dual kind of thing. And I think it shocks her that she actually did it because it was kind of like an impulse response. Like she just saw the opportunity and took it, and then afterwards went, oh, why did I do that? Why do I like that? So yeah, that moment's very interesting in my opinion. So as Jude is talking about how she can't afford to be distracted, that she tomorrow has to get Vivian Oak from the mortal world, how she has to come up with either a scheme better than Maddox or a way to make Maddox's scheme safe for Oak, instantly made me think of what the previous seneschal, the one that she went to go talk to, the other human, his advice to her is to become a better juggler than him. That you can only have so many balls up in the air because you only have so many hands. And we're starting to see that Jude is starting to have too many balls in the air. And eventually, it's all going to come down. Jude's saying, I concentrate on what I'm going to say to Vivi instead of thinking of Cardan. I do not want to consider what happened between us. I do not want to think about the way his muscles moved, or how his skin felt, or the soft gasping sounds he made, or the slide of his mouth against mine. First off. Yeah, but second off, it's proving the point that when you try not to think about something, you're gonna think about it. But also, it's another ball that she's trying to juggle in the air, only she's trying to pretend like it's not a ball, but her mind and like Cardan keep throwing that ball in the mix, and it's a heavier ball, so it's like throwing her off balance as she's trying to juggle all her other responsibilities and plans. And if she just thought about it and maybe talked about it with Cardan, it wouldn't be a ball that she would have to worry about, being thrown at her every now and then. So we can see that Jude is aware enough of why she doesn't want to think about what her and Cardan did, because it's different also than what her relationship was like with Locke in the last book. From the very beginning, and she said to him, this is all a bit of fun. It was nothing serious. Like, she didn't have strong feelings for him, but yet she still got burned in the end. But with Cardan, ever since she kissed him, she, I think, could sense that there was something more going on. That whatever it is like a shadow hovering over the two of them, and she does want to make eye contact with it, and she does want to identify it, but it's love. And she knows deep down that it's love. And the thing that makes her feel vulnerable, because with love, you are making yourself vulnerable. You are exposing everything about yourself. But she also knows, and we know thanks to Maddox, that he loved her mother, still loves her mother. He continuously tells us, and yet he unalived her, and he also was hurt by her. She left him. Like, look what love did to Maddox and her mother and her father. I love this bit of foreshadowing where, like, Jude, holds the knife to Locke's throat, and she's surprised that he thinks that she is her sister. And she says, if you think my sister would put a knife to your throat, perhaps you should delay your nuptials. And we know what Taryn does later. Jude confronting Locke is listing the motivations that, like, I believe is going on behind Locke, like why he's messing with Cardan and just like playing with them. But I think that's what's going on. But I also like that she pretty much says to him, like, knock it off. Like, rumors spread, his subjects would forget to be afraid, and soon the lesser courts would think that they can go against him. Locke may not be doing this intentionally, but he is undermining the power of this kingdom and leaving them vulnerable. What Locke says to Jude is interesting, because this would have been the old Jude, now we're seeing, because he points out, like, you might have fascinated Cardan with your hips and lips and warm mortal skin, but I know that in your heart, whatever he has promised you, you still hate him. You'd love to see him brought low in front of his entire court. Now, if you had asked her last book, yeah, definitely. But since I think her kissing Carden and using him for her coup, things have definitely changed. Now she doesn't want to see him brought low. Now she's kind of working with him, not entirely, but also feeling sorry for him and falling in love. Jude talks about how her and Taryn had only visited Vivi one other time since she moved in with Heather and with Oak, and during that time, Maddox had given Taryn to give to her a housewarming gift, and it's a salt dish that never empties. And it's interesting because we know salt's important to their world, especially for like Jude and Taryn, because they're mortals. Whenever they eat any fairy food, they're supposed to have salt to make sure that they don't fall under any fairy enchantments. Case in point with Jude in the last book with the fairy fruit. But it's interesting that Maddox, who you would not think of giving a salt dish, that seems like an Aurenia gift, to Vivi, who's a fairy, unless he's trying to like be helpful to a point, because Vivi is kind of like her father, then falling in love with a mortal, and he's like, you know, maybe you should be a little bit smarter than I was and keep her a little bit safer, but who knows, it's Maddox. Going back to that previous video, that would also mean that Maddox assumes that Vivi would be returning to Fairy. Like, he just assumes that would be the case, that she wouldn't be able to stay away. So she would obviously bring Heather, like how Maddox brought their mother to Fairy. But also, I don't know, like, I can't see Maddox thinking that far ahead, but I kind of can be like, don't learn from my mistakes, but at the same time, like, he wasn't that observant to Jude and Taryn's plights. We get this very interesting moment with Jude because she's talking about how her and the Roach are returning these humans after they had taken them from their beds to use to dig a new tunnel for the Court of Shadows, and she's like, well, you think I'd be against this, but they made a bargain, even though they didn't know what the bargain was exactly for, which, in my opinion, that's not fair, but it's showing that Jude is slightly hypocritical and actually doesn't associate herself as fully human. Like, yeah, she's constantly being reminded that she is mortal, that she is human, and she is aware of it literally every month when she gets her period, but she doesn't count herself as one because, one, she doesn't belong in the mortal world, she doesn't want to be there, and two, she is fine with them taking mortals out of their bed, making them unaware to do manual labor, and it's kind of showing how easily she is indoctrinated with the world of fairy and disconnected she is with her, like, mortal human self. But this makes Jude also hypocritical and very complex because she hates the old human seneschal because he never helped Taryn and Jude. No other humans helped Taryn and Jude, but yet she never helped any other humans herself. She only did it once. And it's understandable. She doesn't have any power in this world. She doesn't feel safe. She wants to stay in this world, and she's afraid if she helps other humans, she might be kicked out of it. But yet, it's interesting because she's seeing how bad they're treating humans, but she gets to be a special case where she's not treated as bad, but she still is. So she hates them, but she wants to stay here. And at the same time, she is not helping other humans. She might, grumble and be like, how dare they do that? But yet, say it's within their nature, but is it really in their nature? And if you're not helping, you're turning a blind eye, then you're the bystander effect and you're just as bad as the rest. We also get this very interesting interaction of her and the Roach in the diner, which is showing that he knows more about the mortal world than Jude does, but yet he says, did you know that your people thought we took the wholesomeness out of mortal food? So he's still associating of your people, but he knows more about this world than Jude. When Jude says, it hurts a little to watch because Aurenia no more gave birth to Oak than to me or Taryn, but she is very clearly Oak's mother while she has steadfast refused to be ours. Now, one, it could be just because there was a bond because he was born, like, kind of from her, but not really. And she was with him since he was a baby, whereas they were a little bit older. But it's also a constant reminder that Jude and Taryn are the interlopers, that they don't belong. And even though Aurenia does like Taryn a little bit more and does help Taryn, they still don't get the same amount of love that she gives Oak. Ooh, this just hit me because I was just talking in the last chapter about how Jude was being a little hypocritical that, she grumbles about how the Fae treat human, but yet she does the exact same thing when she takes humans out of their beds, bewitch them, and makes them enter a bargain that they don't know the full extent of to dig a tunnel under the Court of Shadows and returns them to gold, and she tries to write it off saying it's fine. But she doesn't help any other humans, but all the time she grumbles how no humans helped her and Taryn. The only time she's done it was once in the previous book, and then now with Heather. She's trying to explain the rules and explain things, but when it backfires and Heather still gets hurt in this world because, like Vivi says, it's a giant mousetrap, it's the world of fairy, she blames Vivi. She thinks it's Vivi's fault that she wasn't looking out, that she didn't explain all the things, not taking into account that she could have played more of a role. She could have helped out because all Jude yearned for was another human to help her and Taryn, and no one did. Neither did any fairy. And she's not taking into account that it's kind of within fairy's natures to be oblivious of what the humans need.
When Jude says, "It's strange to be back in the house where I grew up, tempting to run up the stairs and throw open the doors to my old room to see if there's any traces of me there, tempting to go into Maddox's study and go through his papers like the spy that I am." Now, one is showing this, that she's in the midst of her transformation, that she's changing from a tadpole to a toad, she's changing from childhood to adulthood, and it's, when you go into your childhood home, it's hard not to feel like a child again. But yet, simultaneously, it's her showing that she still is kind of thinking of things in black and white. Like, she's still a little surprised that Maddox hasn't cut her off and that she is now this adult, this spy, and that what she should really be doing is spying on him. So she's in this weird gray area. Once again, we're having someone question Jude's decision, because in the first book we had Vivi being like, "We can leave. You don't have to exist here. Like, things suck. We can leave." But Heather says it now too. She's like, "You're describing this world to be like this way, but why don't you leave?" And Jude doesn't answer. And I think it's because Jude has spent so many years, so many of her formative years, living under fear, that it's the only thing that she knows. I think it's kind of like when someone is in war for so long and then they're all of a sudden out of it. They don't know how to exist in a peacetime because you're just so wired now to be under war. And I think that's what's happening with Jude. Like, she doesn't know how to exist not under this constant pressure of fear. Arinia is saying to Jude, "Stay for dinner. Maddox would like that. I would too." It's interesting because in the beginning of this chapter, Jude literally was saying that she felt jealous of how Arinia treats Oak versus how she treats Taryn and her. But I think Arinia is changing. I think she realized after recent events that, one, Taryn and Jude are kind of fairy-like. They have definitely adopted their mannerisms. And the other thing is, I think with everyone out of the home, she realized what she's missing all this time, this family that was there that she didn't acknowledge, and now she kind of misses that family that could be there, and so she's trying to foster it, and I think that's why her relationship with them is a little bit different going forward. I love this moment because Vivi's like, "Oh, can you take this to Carden?" It's like, "Congratulations on being a king present." And Arinia says, "He's the High King of Elfhame. Whether or not you played together, you cannot call him as you did when you were children." Which kind of like encompasses a lot of the problems going on throughout most of this book so far, which is how others such as Locke, such as Maddox, all these other people have been treating Jude and Carden. They've been treating them like they have prior to their elevation in status. Oh my god, I hate this because I'm jealous too, but it's Carden, doing what Jude has asked of him, which is an improvement. She didn't command him to do this. She asked him to go seduce Narcia, and she's a little bit jealous, and so am I, but I love that she watches and Narcia laughs, showing the long column her throat, because it's mirroring this moment that her and Carden had in that heated moment behind the throne room, where she throws her head back, baring her throat to him, feeling vulnerable as they're making out. And I love it. You know what else is interesting? The amount of people that recognize Jude from her parents. Like, Carden's mother being like, "I recognize you. You look just like your mother. I knew your mother." And now Grimson being like, "Oh, I recognize you." And she's like, "Yeah, Queen of Murph." And he's like, "No, you look like your father. Your father came to visit me once." So it makes me wonder, like, how involved in important were her parents in this world prior, and now I want to know more about her parents' time in this world. But Jude's parents being brought up a couple times so far in this book is interesting because it's kind of showing this secret shadow that's kind of hovering over her, and it's the same thing with Carden with his mother's past, that the two of them are kind of under this pressure, this shadowy pressure that of their parents' deeds that they can't quite get out of. They're trying to make a life for themselves, but they can't quite get out of their parents' shadows. Oh, Jude, I love how wrong she is sometimes, because when Grimson asks about Taryn's marriage, he asks, "Is it a love match?" And she says it must be, since there's no practical value in it. But there is. It's not a love match. There's a practical value. It's a way for Taryn to earn her place in fairy, and it's actually a pretty good way, because she's not just marrying any fairy, she's marrying the gentry. She's earning a pretty good place in fairy. One, I love that the jewelry that Jude does decide to give to Taryn is a moon and star earring, because they're, Jude and Taryn are twins, but they're so different. So the moon and star are both part of the night sky, but they're different things. But also, he says it's, to make you beautiful, that your husband would not leave her side for quite some time. Taryn wears that all the time, but yet that's not the case. Locke does leave her side, so I want to know what its real magic is. I kind of love how Grimson can get to the heart of things, and it's a little scary because with his offer for Taryn's gift, it's pointing out that Taryn and Jude are struggling right now, that they're not the same. They don't want to be the same, but they don't like if one is doing better than the other, and he's giving her
I'm going to make her more beautiful than you. Are you willing to do that? But also he's like, can you give an offer to the High King? I can make him an armor of ice to shatter every blade that strikes in. It will make his heart too cold to feel pity. And that's the one thing that Cardan does not like, is when people pity him. Oh, also with the offer the armor, I think he's also recognizing that Cardan is not a fighter. He does not look like he would be a fighter. And he's also offering him like free swords with the might of like 30 soldiers. And I think it's interesting because if Jude does extend it, it would be then giving Cardan the choice of, you can stand on your own, you can fight on your own, or will you still depend on Jude to do the fighting for you? And Cardan obviously picks Jude. Okay, this is a little rude of Maddox, because he's saying like, what if you only want to thwart me? You can hardly expect me to take it on faith that now you're in earnest. Although Maddox has every reason to distrust me, it stings. Meanwhile, he was the one asking Jude to lie. He previously, a few chapters ago, said, you can easily change sides, you can easily break vows, you can lie. But yet when it comes to him, he is hovering that over her head again. Once again, something that her and Tyrion have to continuously prove, and he wants her to use against others, even though then it means that she will not be able to have a place in this world because no one will trust her. I don't think Maddox sees this because his bias is still bleeding through, but he is once again setting a ceiling for Jude. He's saying that you can't go any higher than this. Just like how Rhaenyra said, don't reach too high. Don't reach to be, Dane's mistress. You should be content with what you have just existing in this world. And here he's saying, like, does the High King know how good you are at running his kingdom? Complimenting, but then follows it up by saying, as much as I hope you will realize how much better it would be if you're running it for your own family. Pretty much doing the exact same job, just with a different guy, just with Oak, with me in charge. And it's so sad that he's still not realizing, like, he just wants to use her and discard her. He doesn't realize that, like, he's not saying, like, you should figure out a way to, like, maybe marry Cardan and then off him and take the crown for yourself. No. He still is setting a ceiling. So while there are many antagonistic forces coming in and out and playing throughout this trilogy, the two biggest ones for Cardan and Jude are Balkan and Maddox, the two father figures, which makes it so much worse that they're working against them. And we're seeing here, though, that, Balkan is playing that against Cardan. He's saying that you should be praising me for unaliving Dane for what he's did to you, both of us. He acted against us. He turned their father against them, and their father willingly went with it. So, Cardan outwardly hated his father and Dane, but he says you shouldn't have unalived your sisters. But Balkan says, did they intercede for you? Did any one of your dear sisters take you in? How can you think they cared for you when they wouldn't go against father for your sake? AKA, they may not have outwardly, acted against you, but they didn't help you either. They're just as bad. They're just as liable. Also coming out of the scene is that we're seeing Cardan can definitely hold his own as a High King of Elflame. He does not need Jude holding his hand, that he can actually run this kingdom well enough that, especially the public side of it, he's doing great against Balkan. But I also love this subtle hint at Jude's feelings towards Cardan, that she feels enough for him without telling us, because she is willing to step in between him and Balkan and would happily fight Balkan for what he is saying, for how he is hurting Cardan in this moment. So Balk is pointing out that it seems like a fair amount of people are starting to pick up that Cardan's only play acting as the High King, that he doesn't have the power, that someone else is running the kingdom, and so Balkan's threatening that you need me or else you'll lose my help and lose the kingdom. But the thing is, this is interesting because this is right before Cardan actually truly does seize his power, truly does become the High King of Elfhame. When Jude gets taken by the Undersea, he no longer has his crutch, and in order to get her back, he finally accepts this role and all the power that comes with it. So as Jude's laying out all the potential places that they are planning to catch the Undersea using Oak as bait, it's interesting to me because we know a little bit later that Oak was never their intention. It was always Jude. And it's because Jude never saw herself as an actual player on the board, even though she wanted to be a player on the board. But it's also showing that others are starting to pick up that she is more important than what others might have anticipated. That, going back to the previous chapter when Maddox says, does the High King realize how good you are at running his country? Apparently Maddox isn't the only one realizing this. Obviously Orla and Balkan notices this too and realizes if we take her out of the equation, then Cardan will be fumbling and he will need us. In addition to that, it also just kind of hit me that it's so intriguing that in the first book, we know Cardan wanted nothing to do with the throne, especially after watching the majority of his family be unalived. He saw the problems of wanting to be that close to power. And yet Jude didn't fully comprehend that until, I don't even know if she fully comprehends it after she gets taken by the Undersea. We're not there yet. But like, the reason why she's taken is because she's that close to power, that close to the throne. So I actually knew the scene with Locke hunting Jude was coming up, and I spent some time thinking about potentially why he hunted her. However, it's a lengthy video, so I think I'm going to post it separately. If you're seeing this in the future, it's already posted on my page. If you're seeing this video that I posted this morning, it'll be on later today, but it'll be there. So Jude's talking about how the hunters of the, Locke's group emerge, and one of them draws an axe which shines under the light of the first quarter moon. And I was like, that's very specific to tell us about the first quarter moon. Let me look up the symbolism of it. And according to Google, it is a period where obstacles tend to raise their head and decisions need to be made, which seems very fitting with stuff about to emerge. I really like, though, that this moment is, I think, the final kind of moment where she's realizing everything that people have been telling her, like, don't go off on your own, like, between Maddox, Taryn, and the Roach, saying, like, take someone that you do have a target on your back, you're not invisible anymore. This is the moment that she's finally going, oh, crap. They were right, and she's starting to realize, I think, her worth in this society now. I love Jude saying here, I walked through these woods hundreds of times in my childhood. I never thought I would need to be armored for battle here. Because it's kind of a parallel in, like, to the world of fairy. That she has existed in the world of fairy. She knows the dangers of the woods. She knows the dangers of the world of fairy. But because she has been here so long and has been genuinely safe, she forgot to be alert. I think I miss this every other time I read this book, because there's a moment where Jude, jumps off her horse, swings up in the tree, and she says, in the moonlight, I think I make out amber eyes as a rider's long sword swings through the air, and I'm pretty sure the amber eyes is Locke, and that means that he was going to go too far, that maybe he wasn't just trying to scare her, that he was probably going to unalive her. And it may not have been his intention, just like with Maddox in the very beginning, like, he didn't intend to unalive their mother, but in the heat of the moment, it went too far. Or I wouldn't put it past him for actually wanting to unalive her. Maybe he is siding with Narcia. And maybe he sees if he eliminates Jude, one, it'll help Narcia. Two, it would allow him to keep his place because Jude's the one thing that's kind of preventing Carden from swaying to him. And three, it'll be great drama for his wedding. Jude's reaction in this moment, I think, really marks her as Maddox's child, especially with the blood coating her face, because she could have very easily, and probably would have been the safer option, to just climb the tree up higher and wait it out, to be too high for them to shoot the bow and arrows, think like, Katniss in the Hunger Games, and just wait until they got bored, because they would have eventually, and left. But instead, she doesn't do that. She turns around and fights back. And it's interesting, because I think Taryn would have done the first option. When Arenia asks Jude, would it be so bad to have Oak say in Fairy, I'm afraid of losing his love, Jude knows that Arenia already knows the answer. She just needs someone else to be the villain, someone to be responsible for keeping them apart, because that goes into her and Taryn's style. Whereas Jude and Maddox are on the front line. They're responsible for their every action, and they know to blame themselves if something bad goes wrong. Whereas with Arenia and Taryn, they aren't making actions for themselves, they're manipulating others to take actions, which, yes, can keep you safe, but that means that you need someone to blame when you don't like what happens. And to further contextualize, like, Arenia and Taryn's style, it's very similar to, like, Alicent Hightower in the House of the Dragon. It keeps you a little bit safer, but at the same time, you have very little control over the outcome and what people actually do. It's interesting that Vivi's first question when she walks in the bathroom and sees Jude's leg bleeding and her holding a knife is, did you do this to yourself? Now, it could maybe be her wondering if Jude's trying to draw attention away from Taryn because, maybe she's jealous. It's, a sisterly thing, especially if they're twins. Like, they've been trying to one-up each other, but that's not Jude, really. But I could see that being, like, the first wrong assumption she would make. But also because she probably doesn't assume Jude's life is at risk as much as it is, because she also ignored the other times when Jude was a child where her life was at risk. While yes, Jude, after existing in Fairy for so long and being able to understand how that world works, wouldn't know how to exist in the mortal world because she doesn't know how that works. She could learn, but she points out something a little bit more important to Vivi, which is that even if she did leave this world behind, this world wouldn't leave them behind. It would still come after Oak and Vivi. I really love this moment where Jude recognizes that she could ask for help. She could, get her leg properly looked after and not have infection.
But she acknowledges that if she did that, then it would be admitting that she needed Maddox, that he won, that come home for good. And it's a thing that I feel like everyone, especially nowadays, experiences when you're, changing from childhood to adulthood, that sometimes you don't want to ask your parents for help because you want to prove that you can do it on your own. Actually, now that I think about it, I wonder if Arinia did notice maybe Jude might have been limping even if she was trying to hide it. And so she picked out that dress on purpose without telling Jude, because she knows how Jude's like. Jude wouldn't like it if Arinia points out, like, I know you're wounded and I picked out this dress because, yeah, it's a lot of cleavage, but I'm trying to help you out because everyone will be looking at your cleavage and not the fact that you're limping. If you don't already know, I've been doing a literary analysis dissection series about the Cruel Prince. I'm currently working through the Wicked King, and this video I'm actually keeping a little bit separate from the rest of chapter 20 because I knew it was going to be lengthy, because I did spend some time thinking about why Locke potentially was hunting Jude on the eve of his wedding. Now, first, I just want to preface by saying it's interesting because Locke has always been described as looking fox-like, being fox-like, and literally right before him and his group emerge, she hears like foxes making their weird screaming calls to one another. And it's interesting because historically the elite and noble would have their fox hunts, and here we're seeing like a role reversal where he's the hunter and she's the prey. But I think there are two potential reasons as to why Locke decides to hunt Jude on the eve of his wedding. Now, one is to elicit a response to add to his grand story that he is curating. And he has found that with most people, but especially with Jude, the best way to elicit a response is to enrage them. And we saw that in the first book, for instance. She got so angry at Carter and his friends for throwing her and Terry in the river that she retaliated at a later point. She got so angry that she literally sword fought her sister. So he's thinking, this is the best way to get her to do something dramatic at his wedding, because that is his ideal wedding, is if something dramatic, especially the sister, the bride, perfect. That's what he wants. He doesn't care if it upsets Taryn. He's just here for the story, which leads into my next part, which is that he is biased against humans. It may not be as apparent as, say, like Valerian is, but he definitely has a bias against human. You can kind of see it subtly, for instance, in the first book with like how Maddox said that he asked for Taryn's hand in marriage. When Maddox is like, are you gonna be faithful? He goes, well, you know how they are and you know what humans are like. And even when like Taryn is trying to recall why, Locke was testing her because of, how humans are. He sees humans as form of entertainment. And, that's why he made Jude the Queen of Mirth. That's why he is hunting her now. Not only because typically the Fae use humans as entertainment, so he is not any different than those people like Valerian. He just isn't as apparent about it. But it's also with these two moments, it's a reminder of Jude's place in this society, because she is at the bottom, because she's a human. She may have hop, skip, jumped ahead on the hierarchy and now is a seneschal to the High King, but she's still beneath him. It's what he's reminding her, because leading up to this moment, 2 times she has ordered him out of the room, and he would have ignored her if Carden didn't, tell him also to listen to Jude, pretty much like say like leave. But then also Jude threatened him, and so I think that was the final straw. He's like, no, here's the thing, I won't say it to your face, but I'm gonna react in this way and laugh about it because this is Locke we're talking about. But he is doing this, reminding her place in this social hierarchy. And I think these are the reasons why potentially he decided to hunt Jude on the eve of his wedding. Maybe. I don't know.